in America about health insurance practices, discrimination, profiteering by these very wealthy companies as people get sick and sometimes die. This has bubbled over. And there are plenty of people who oppose vigilante violence but are still reacting to that United Healthcare shooting with this long bubbling deep anger over elite capitalist healthcare and a broken system. So it's a big issue, life and death for many. It's roiling the country. And I bring it up as part of our special report that I'm about to show you something new because it's fairly clear it's not a, quote, red or blue issue. It's not a, quote, left or right issue, even though politics is almost constantly presented through a left versus right lens. We've pulled these headlines from many reputable outlets over the years. Headlines and rhetoric constantly tell you about Dems on the left, GOP on the right. This is so automatic, and if you follow the news, I bet you're very familiar, that it's kind of just how politics is discussed. But does that lens capture everything? And does it capture what's happening right now? Well, we're going to turn right now to a wider view on what's happening. It includes that lens, but expands it. So I'm going to start very simple. You will completely recognize this. The traditional left-right spectrum, right? Very clean, straightforward. Not filling in the chart yet, just left, progressive, right, conservative. And you could put things all across through that lens, right? But some issues don't just fit left and right, especially lately. When you hear broad concern about what I mentioned, the broken parts of our capitalist, profit-driven healthcare in America, or opposition to discredited elite institutions from Wall Street to certain U.S. government foreign policy decisions, well, some of those issues may follow a more up-down track. This is a different way to think about it, but you can consider up as norms and order, rules, institutions, those things we hear about. Basically, that's the top. And you could think of the down part as the opposition to those things up on top, the anger at elites, the call that sometimes disorder is necessary and disruption is overdue because those old norms and order have been considered failures or even completely discredited. That's a different axis. And here's the thing. It doesn't have to replace left-right when you think about it, because ideology still exists, of course, but the up-down issues may be driving a lot of politics. So it makes more sense when you plug in examples. Consider this exercise. The standard left-right spectrum goes from, say, larger government to smaller government. And if you trust institutions, you might back expanding government programs. So if you look at the upper left, just go to the very upper left, and I'll guide you through this. It says expand Medicare for all, because that would be believing in a current system like Medicare and doing a liberal thing. If you go to the upper right, you see abortion bans, using government power. That's the current system to enforce a conservative social priority. And on the normal left-right, you have larger, smaller government, of course. Now, if you go to the down section of this, you might see plans that cut against the existing system. And that's the down part, but the left-right part you still have to work out. Liberals say defund the police. I bet you've heard about that, but not all liberals. These more disruptive liberals would say that. Or conservatives say just abolish the whole darn Department of Education. Break a norm. Now, what I've just showed you in capsule form is a way to think about this, a new lens from someone who knows a lot about politics, Obama veteran Blake Zeff. So he's worked actually in the upper space, if you want to think about it as traditional experience. But he says that a lot of the energy right now is on the more disruptive side. He writes that politicians can actually be tracked this way. I put this up briefly, but now we're going to give you some time to absorb it. Elites who uphold the system are in that upper band. So you take Pelosi, right? She was Speaker of the House. However liberal you think she is, she's up there. Mitt Romney would be the conservative version of that. A conservative Republican who still stood for norms, opposed all kinds of attacks on the rule of law, right? Down there on the near the left-right line, you can see Sherrod Brown on the left, or a veteran GOP leader like Scalise on the right. And if you go all the way down, you can see people who, in addition to ideology, are tapping this disruptive energy. In fact, when you think about Bernie Sanders, you might already kind of know that he's not your traditional political elite. You kind of feel in your gut. And he's in that more disruptive area of liberalism, just like that other conservative there. Abbott has been very vocal about not just being ideologically conservative, but tapping into what he says is necessary disruptive energy against traditions and norms, sometimes even claiming he'll just break laws even though he's in the government. He won't follow Supreme Court precedents, he said, although he hasn't always acted on that. So The View may capture something real here, something that's missing in the standard language of politics. And what we see matters to both to grasp reality, but also for anyone who wants to try to face what's happening right now or channel political solutions. The writer I mentioned, Blake Zeff, says that while left and right has explained a lot, this moment might turn even more on up or down, and that effective leaders may channel that. And think about it. We have all these people, apart from Harris and Trump and the recent campaign, all these people agitating against elite bankers, elite CEOs, elite Wall Street practices, elite bureaucrats, elite orders about COVID and how to live your life, elite media, big theme, and then, of course, elite politicians. And that's the kind of attack that can dog anyone, even anywhere on the chart, if you think this populist energy is driving something. So, I told you we'd try to think a little different tonight. Joining us now is that political veteran I mentioned behind this whole lens and analysis. Obama veteran Blake Zeff is a documentarian. You might recall him being on MSNBC a lot, providing political analysis. He's been on different programs. And we should mention his documentary, Lone Wolves, looked at some of these elite failures and the student debt crisis that aired on MSNBC. I have to mention, I was among those that he interviewed out in the New York City streets. We grabbed a hot dog for that project. Tonight, I'll be interviewing Zeff. Welcome.
Thanks.
We took extra time to try to really build out what you're saying. Anything new is always a little different, and you say, oh, that's not the usual terms. But just in your own words, what do you mean by this up-down populist energy?
Yeah, the way to really look at this and think about this in a simple way is voters sometimes really care about issues. And so you and I and others, we talk about, as you said, left to right. Are they too far left? Are they moving to the center? Are they going to the right? And that matters. But the point here is that other stuff matters too. And those other things are attitudes, approaches. And we are right now already at a specific time of anger. I'm sure our older viewers can remember Ronald Reagan was trying to sell us a sunny optimism. He talked about a shining city on a hill. And Bill Clinton talked about a place called hope. Those were hopeful, positive messages that they were putting forth. That is not the time we're in now. Okay, if it wasn't enough of a wake-up call when Donald Trump won, running on really a campaign of anger and disorder, well then, as you mentioned, the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO and the reaction from many that happened after that shows that we are in a time of anger. And so it's really important if we're going to look at causes, issues, candidates, campaigns, we don't just look at that left to right spectrum where they are on the issues. You got to look at also, are they in touch with the anger and the feelings and the attitudes that people have today? And so that's what we're trying to do with that up-down scale in addition to the left-right.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so I mentioned your experience, Obama. You also worked for Hillary Clinton. But Bernie Sanders would seem, someone who you at one point campaigned against, to be, and we'll put up on the screen the politicians chart we made. And again, this is not science. This is just a way to think about it. But tell us why Bernie would be where he is and what he's tapped into.
Yeah, I think, look, that down part, a lot of it's attitude. So a lot of it is vibes, if you will. If you have someone who seems angry, who's feeling, we talk a lot in politics, as you mentioned. I've worked in politics for 25 years. And the best politicians, remember Bill Clinton talked about, I feel your pain. Well, that changes through the eras and the generations, but always if you're a politician who can connect with the authentic feelings that voters are having, that is a good thing. And right now, as I mentioned, anger is a big thing that people are feeling because You have the three richest billionaires in this country have as much money as the bottom 50% of the country. You have more than 2/3 of the country says the economy is not working for them. 72% say we're on the wrong track. So no matter how positive the larger economic trends, like the stock market, appear to be, it's not how people are feeling right now. And where Sanders ends up on that down scale is that he has been able to channel that anger and really rhetorically do that. Now, in terms of policies, it's about upending systems. So you did mention Medicare for all before as being, on the left, and maybe that could be up. You could also argue that that's on the downside because it's about upending the system that we have of healthcare right now. Right now, we've got this private health insurance that everyone has, and so many people are upset about. That's what, that shooting was about. Upending that system, which is something that Sanders has called for, is something that puts him on that down scale.
Yeah. So, Blake, a lot of Democrats have looked over this past year, and beyond being upset with a loss, which is how anybody reacts, there's an extra layer of almost aghast frustration that Donald Trump and wealthy benefactors are somehow cast as the populist rebels. What does your lens or your spectrum do to explain that, and does it offer any new path for Democrats?
Yeah, I totally get it. And to be clear, people on the left and the right, those issues are still very valid. Those opinions are still valid. But this accounts for the attitudes and the way in which people are communicating. And what you essentially had during that campaign was Kamala Harris, who, you're right, is not as wealthy as Donald Trump, was not born with a silver spoon that he was, but she found herself in a position where she was talking about protecting the democratic process and the democratic system. And that's about protecting the status quo, norms, order, all that kind of stuff. And Trump was trying to bring it down and was a man about disorder and disruption. And for a lot of people out there who are angry, they might agree with Harris on the left to right scale on the issues. Right. But if you're feeling angry and the system is not delivering for you, and you have someone who's saying the system is bad and I want to upend it, that can be appealing to people.